Some people never seem to panic. They rarely complain, almost never ask for help, and somehow stay calm when life becomes difficult. Most of us look at people like that and think, they're just mentally strong. But psychology asks a completely different question. What if that strength wasn't something they were born with? What if it was something their generation quietly learned without ever realizing it? Because if you grew up between 1965 and 1980, your brain may have been shaped in ways that still influence your decisions today, and you probably don't even notice it. Before we go any further, it's important to understand one thing. Psychology doesn't claim that everyone in Generation X has the same personality. Human beings are far too complex for that. But research does suggest that when millions of children grow up during the same historical period, surrounded by similar social conditions, their brains often adapt in surprisingly similar ways. That's why this isn't really a story about labels. It's a story about how the environment quietly teaches the brain what to expect from life. Generation X came of age during a period of rapid change. Many children grew up with two working parents. Divorce became more common in many communities. After school, plenty of kids let themselves into an empty house, made their own snacks, finished homework, and learned to solve everyday problems without immediately asking an adult for help. There were no smartphones to answer every question, no group chats to ask for advice, and no endless stream of online opinions telling them what to think. Of course, every family was different, but for many children, independence wasn't a goal, it was simply part of everyday life. Here's where psychology becomes interesting. The brain doesn't just remember experiences, it learns from them. Neuroscientists have shown that repeated experiences strengthen certain neural pathways. The more often a behavior helps you navigate your environment, the more automatic it becomes. If a child repeatedly learns that solving problems alone works, the brain gradually begins treating independence as the normal response. Years later, that same person may appear unusually calm during a crisis, comfortable making decisions, and confident working without constant guidance. What others call confidence may actually be years of quiet adaptation. But every adaptation comes with a trade-off. The same person who handles almost every challenge alone may find it surprisingly difficult to ask for help when they truly need it. Not because they don't trust people, but because their brain became so familiar with self-reliance that depending on someone else feels unfamiliar. Psychologists sometimes describe this as learned independence. It's a strength in many situations, but it can also make life heavier than it needs to be, because carrying everything alone eventually becomes exhausting, even for the strongest minds. There's another pattern that often appears when psychologists study Generation X. Many people from this generation don't express emotions the way younger generations often do. They may care deeply about someone without saying much. They may be worried without showing panic. And they may be struggling while still insisting that everything is fine. It's easy to mistake this for emotional distance, but psychology suggests it may reflect something different. Emotional expression and emotional experience are not the same thing. A person can feel intensely while revealing very little on the outside. Think about a child who grows up believing that staying calm helps keep life predictable. Over time, the brain begins rewarding emotional restraint. Instead of reacting immediately, it learns to pause, observe, and continue functioning. This isn't necessarily emotional suppression, and it isn't always unhealthy. In many situations, it's an effective way to remain focused under pressure. That's why many Gen X adults are often described as dependable during emergencies. While others are overwhelmed by the situation, they quietly concentrate on what needs to be done first. But psychology also reminds us that every useful strategy has limits. If the brain spends decades becoming skilled at controlling emotions, expressing vulnerability can begin to feel unfamiliar. Asking for comfort may feel harder than solving the problem alone. That's why some people appear incredibly strong on the outside, while privately carrying stress that nobody else notices. Their calm isn't fake. It's simply a habit the brain has practiced for years. Here's something worth thinking about. Have you ever known someone who rarely talked about their feelings, yet always showed up when others needed help? They might not have been avoiding emotions at all. They may have simply learned that actions were more reliable than words. Human behavior often reflects the lessons people repeatedly experienced, not just the personalities they were born with. Another fascinating pattern involves skepticism. Many members of Generation X grew up during a period of rapid cultural, economic, and technological change. They watched industries change, institutions evolve, and new ideas replace old ones. Experiences like these can encourage the brain to question rather than immediately accept what it hears. In psychology, healthy skepticism is different from cynicism. Cynicism assumes the worst. Skepticism simply asks, is there enough evidence for me to believe this? That small pause may not seem important, but it can reduce impulsive decisions and encourage more reflective thinking. Researchers who study cognitive biases have found that our brains naturally follow social proof. When enough people repeat the same idea, it begins to feel true, even when we haven't examined it ourselves. This tendency helps people cooperate, but it also makes us easier to influence. Because much of Generation X formed its identity before social media became part of everyday life, many people had more opportunities to develop opinions through direct experience, rather than constant online feedback. That doesn't mean they were immune to social influence. No one is. But it may explain why many became more comfortable relying on personal judgment instead of immediate public approval. Of course, none of this means Generation X had all the answers. Every adaptation creates both strengths and blind spots. The ability to work independently can sometimes make collaboration more difficult. Staying emotionally composed can sometimes make genuine vulnerability feel uncomfortable. And questioning ideas carefully can sometimes become hesitation when quick action is needed. The brain doesn't develop perfect strategies. It develops strategies that were useful in the environment where they were learned. What protected you at one stage of life may not always serve you in another. This is where one of psychology's most encouraging discoveries comes in. The brain remains adaptable throughout life. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself through new experiences. That means the patterns you developed decades ago are not permanent. New relationships can change the way you trust. Different work environments can reshape the way you solve problems. Honest conversations can make emotional expression feel safer than it once did. The brain is constantly updating its expectations based on what it repeatedly experiences. Perhaps that's why two people born in the same year can become completely different adults. One may become highly independent, while another values teamwork above everything else. One may openly express emotions, while another prefers quiet resilience. Generation influences us, but it never defines us. Family dynamics, culture, personality, life events, and individual experiences all interact with the brain in unique ways. Psychology consistently shows that human behavior is shaped by many forces working together, not by a single label. So maybe the real lesson isn't that Generation X was tougher, quieter, or more independent than every other generation. Those are broad descriptions, and real people are always more complex than stereotypes. A better question is this: what did the world around them repeatedly teach their brains? Because when you understand that, many behaviors stop looking mysterious. You begin to see them as adaptations rather than fixed personality traits. And perhaps that idea extends far beyond Generation X. Every generation grows up in a different world. Some grow up with constant connection, others with more independence. Some learn to express emotions openly, while others learn to carry them quietly. None of these patterns appear by accident. They are shaped by the environments that surround us during our most formative years. The remarkable thing about psychology is that it doesn't ask us to judge these differences. It asks us to understand them. Once you realize that the brain is always adapting to families, communities, technology, culture, and everyday experiences, you stop asking, why are they like that? And start asking a far more useful question. What experiences taught them to see the world this way? That single shift in perspective can replace judgment with curiosity, criticism with empathy, and assumptions with understanding. And in the end, that may be one of the most valuable things psychology can teach us, not just about Generation X, but about human nature itself.